Right after the game, I don't want to hear anything.
Tatiana.
Hello. Morning.
Hi, Tatiana.
So funny. It's morning for you guys and it's evening for me. It's crazy. Those time zones. I'm having
And
it here.
It's
You
a
guys
big
are
world,
about to have
Sasha. It's a
and
big
it's summer. And
I just
it's
want to have
summer
some
for
beer
you
for
and winter
breakfast.
for us.
Tatiana's drinking coffee already.
Yes, because I actually have my, like my engineering sync with the team at 7:30 a.m. my time.
Oh,
So, I basically like wake up my kids, I dress them up, I'm on the phone, and then I'm driving them to their daycare and we're still talking, and I only, like drop off the call right before, I give them kisses and they're in the daycare. So it's like already 4 hours I'm up, maybe even more.
Jeez, that is hectic. Oh,
yeah.
where do you start?
I get up and go do all the chores on the ranch here with all the horses and dogs, and so
All the
a
feeding.
couple hours of that.
Sure. So are we all early risers?
I'm not. I'm not at all.
Classic.
How do you really feel, Tracy?
8:30 would be good for me.
So today is December 10th. This is the architecture working group meeting for Ortelius. I did hit record this time, so we're good to go. I am lagging behind on the doc, but let me throw the link in. Chat, there it is. Kind of do it as I go here. So on the Discord channel, we had I wouldn't say a very long discussion, but we did have a discussion about notifications with Discord and like Slack, and what that means as part of the to Ortelius. And I think part of it is we have to look at whether that should be part of the CI tool, the orchestration tool that's running Ortelius, or if it's something that Ortelius needs to handle on its own. Let me go ahead and share my screen real quick. So one of the things that we have in Ortelius is the ability to do a notification. There's a concept of notification templates. Let's see if this is going to pull up. So if you look at an application here, there's like a successful deployment template and failed deployment template. And if you get into the setup area, you can set up these notifier templates. And there's a bunch of different types that you can use as part of the notification process. Some of them are going to be like Slack, HipChat, email, text messages. So what ends up happening is after you do a deployment, that's where we're going to go ahead and do that notification. Now, there's other notifications that may need to be, that we may want to think about. This is all post-deployment. So that's one thing we should do some investigation around, where we should be looking at notifications. Because if you look at some of the integrations I've seen tools do, especially like with Jira or ServiceNow, where they're using like Jira as the center of the universe. So everything's driven by a Jira ticket, you know, those type of things. And I have a feeling we're moving away from this type of model here. But you would have a Jira ticket that say this is ready to build. You'd go and change a status to build. That would then do a webhook that would go ahead and trigger the build, and then after the build's done, you go ahead and update Jira, say the build's been completed. Now we're on to the next step of doing the deployment, and then you'd update the statuses. So it's this like status loop thing that happens in the between the orchestration tool and the ticketing system. Now I think the way DevOps is moving, I think that type of style of tracking and notifications is kind of going by the wayside. And we need to look at where we want to deal with notifications. Like I said, if you're looking at like a Jenkins pipeline, this is one example that I threw out there. A Jenkins pipeline, there's Slack plugins, there's going to be other plugins that you could actually put in your pipeline. So before you do your build, you could do your Slack notification, and post build and post deployment, you could do another notification at that level. So put your DevOps hats on and think about what type of information and what type of notifications we should be looking at on that front. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah, totally. So this is my life. This is what I do every day, keeping other people's shit running. And I guess I shouldn't say that on the recording, but the the build part of this, starting and ending, interests me with my developer hat on. I've seen people that your CI pipeline is just really busy, and so you're waiting half an hour before your build starts so that you can see if what you changed is actually doing anything. And so people would definitely appreciate being notified of the starting and ending of those things. But with my DevOps hat on, I'm really worried about the deployment side of things. And I agree with you for that. For the deployments, I don't see people using Jira as much, but I definitely see Slack being used to keep people updated with, oh, I'm deploying this in place X or place Y and that sort of thing. One place that I worked built up their own Jenkins to Slack integration, and part of that was being able to dynamically show the progress on the deployment. And so, if you're deploying to 30 different machines, it could say, okay, I've completed 1 of 30, 2 of 30, 3 of 30, and you could actually see how fast that's moving along. And it dynamically updated on the Slack side. So it was just like there was one Slack message for, hey, we're doing this deployment, and then the little bar underneath it for completion changed until it was done. And
so they went back and kept on editing the same message and updating the content of it with the progress.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how that part of that worked, honestly, but yeah, somehow being able to say, okay, we're X percentage done through this thing. And I think the other beneficial part of that is like how long it's been going. If you're 50% through and it's 12 hours later, then that's probably a problem, and somebody would probably want to be able to keep track of that. But at least knowing, for like a MVP sort of thing, that the deployment started and the deployment ended, that would be hugely helpful from a just knowing what's currently flying, in flight sort of thing. And I do see having that information in Slack is beneficial in a broader context, because it doesn't just get consumed by the SRE DevOps type folks, it also ends up being consumed by the users. And so they'll be like, oh, this is down because it's currently under a deployment. And so I'll come back and try an hour later. And so it cuts out, a lot of the, people having to ask, what's up? Why is this down, sort of thing. And so, keeping the broader set of people aware is definitely the advantage of having this stuff in a Slack room that everybody can go to and see what's going on.
Yeah, um I just updated the landscape to add Ortelius in. Remind me, Tracy, we got to approve that PR. But they do they have a Slack channel that the whole landscape is this weird back-end process that does a bunch of reworking and creating the SVG on the fly as part of the build process. And they have a Slack channel that lets you know that it's been completed, because it takes a little bit to do. So I think, yeah, I think finding out what's up is a big question people are trying to find out when they're looking at statuses of deployments and how far along they are.
Yeah, and another aspect of that comes up a lot I've seen is that people don't have adequate permissions, and so the build is going off to some CIDC platform, and I'm dealing with TeamCity these days, so I'm just going to say TeamCity. So the build goes off to TeamCity, but they don't have a login on TeamCity, so they can see in GitHub whether their build succeeded or not. But having some other avenue for people to be able to see that information, gets past those authentication barriers, since everybody's in Slack already.
Right. And the other thing I think with this type of notification, it's really becoming the new dashboard. Before, we used to have dashboards for monitoring this stuff, and that was kind of like the whole blue ocean part of Jenkins, was to pull in a dashboard so you can kind of see what's happening. So, okay, well,
I still build dashboards for people because people like metrics, and I like that stuff for investigation purposes. But
yeah,
like, having it in Slack means I can, like, have the deployment stuff and my PagerDuty notifications in the same room. So it's like, oh, this deploy actually broke something, because I can see at the same point in time, and it sort of lets you coordinate all that, see how it fits together.
well, that brings up a good point. Should we be associating additional metadata to the application and components and things like that? For example, who is the owner of this microservice? So if I need to go find and talk to somebody, what's their email address or Slack handle to talk to them? That type of thing. I'm wondering if we should look at adding in additional metadata. What's the PagerDuty contact, those type of things that are out there. And then when the tricky part is, though, if we have a microservice and we have all that owner information and that metadata about, like who's the lead developer is, where the GitHub repo is, but when we roll it up into an application version, there's going to be an application owner as well. So we'll have multiple ownership levels or notification levels that we need to look at.
Yeah, this actually gets really close to one of the things that I most cared about and wanted to try and do within Ortelius eventually is something along the SEI maturity model sort of thing. You can have a microservice, but if it doesn't have a run book, then it's a less mature microservice. If you don't have a monitoring dashboard that you can link somebody to, then it's not quite as mature. And having that ownership stuff defined, you know, definitely comes as part of that. And, you know, when you get to your failure notification, all of this is stuff that is great to have built into that, you know, PagerDuty alert or whatever the, you know, equivalent is in somebody's world, so that you're not having to go look all that stuff up. And I don't know how hard we want to make this on ourselves, but like some of this stuff changes over time. And so, like, you know, the component may be owned by person B, even though we released it under person A 6 months ago. And so I don't know if we want to worry about that level of the problem, but at least knowing who owned it 6 months ago would be better than nothing.
Yep. Yep.
But yeah, all that fits in with what I, you know, having that meta information means that the service is more mature and more production ready. And, you know, you can, you know, come up with some metric that totals these things together and say, oh, these are my least mature things. And so this is what I need to put engineering focus into to try and get everything up to some consistent level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know when if you start looking at the scaling problem that we're dealing with, and you get into, you know, a couple hundred microservices, and that's spread out across even just a small number of teams, 20 teams, that trying to find out who to talk to when something breaks, it could be challenging. I like that. I like that maturity matrix. I think we'll have to dive into exactly what metadata that we want to associate and kind of slot into the different levels of maturity. So remind me that we need to break this out.
Yeah, I want to get my ECS sync up done before the end of the year, but then, you know, in January, I definitely want to try and get back into figuring this stuff out. And I'm happy to answer questions in the meantime.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to change over to, so component sets. It looks like one of the first things that we need to really address is basically component sets are a collection of component versions. And this comes to, I know Christopher, you asked for like a database schema layout. I think I've been thinking about this one, and instead of doing a more traditional like table schema and how they're related through the foreign keys, I think I'm going to put together one that's more grammar like. So, and I'm going to look at leveraging some of the grammar that's in the SPDX terminology that they use. So, for example, an application version depends upon a component version. You know, an application version has 0 to 1 key value pairs, that type of grammar, and lay it out into a document for everybody. Part of it, the reason I want to, and what I'm going to do is lay it out like that, and I'm going to leave out some of the pieces though, because it'll just get too confusing initially, and we can break those out into a separate one. So part of it is there's two levels. One is tracking relationships, and the next one is, you know, doing deployments actually. So I'm going to break it out into that, you know, so we can actually focus on those two distinct things that Ortelius is able to do. So tracking the relationships, I'll lay out the grammar around all the how a component's related to an application related to an environment, and so on. And then a second document that has to deal with doing a deployment. What actually happens in doing a deployment, because we have in Ortelius actions. So like in this case, we have a pre-action for resizing a cluster at this level. And Sasha, this kind of brings me around to the question that you had yesterday on Discord around AWS regions.
Mm.
So
yeah, no, that was a big question.
well, it's not, it really isn't, because we've depending on what you're doing. So in this case, our hipster store is running on GKE, and I have a cron job that goes out there and just does some Google commands to size the cluster to 0. But when we go out and deploy, somebody goes out and deploys, we actually run a pre-action to the whole deployment that goes out and spins up the cluster size at that level. Now, in your example, this could be, depending on what you're trying to tackle. If you're trying to build a cluster from scratch, this would be a Terraform call or a cloud formation. So your pre-step would be to go through and build out your cluster, get it provisioned, up and running. And then after that, when we go to the component level, the components are going to have their own action as well. So in this case, we're going to be doing a Helm deployment. Where'd it go? It's in here somewhere. I just don't see it.
Yeah, we use Terraform, so that's good to hear. Just use Terraform to do that.
Yeah. So that would be.
I've been fighting with CloudFormation lately, and I definitely wouldn't try and do like a multi-region thing in CloudFormation. But Terraform, you can loop through things, and so you could do the same thing in multiple regions relatively painlessly.
Yeah, and that's what I've heard as well. I haven't played with Terraform myself, but based on what people I've talked to, it's a lot less wordy and it has a lot more functionality, like Christopher said, because it's designed to deal with multiple regions, multiple even cloud providers. It's supposed to abstract out the cloud providers as well. But like I said, we would have the initial pre-action would be to go stand up the cluster, and then the part of that process is you want to make sure that it's already hasn't been already provisioned. So if you need to run it again, then it says, oh, it's all ready to go. I'll just skip over that part, basically do my check and say it's good, come back, and then let the rest of the deployment process happen. Now, one of the nice things with Ortelius is depending on what you need to do, Sasha, for the different regions, if you're breaking them into like, West, US West, US East, maybe Japan or something like that as another region, you can make those environments and you can deploy to the US West environment. And then that environment is going to contain all the different sub-regions out there that you want to push the changes to. The other way you could do it is you can define like let's say we're going to have 5 QA environments. You can define a QA environment, and one of the things is the membership, what endpoints are in them. So at that level, you can have an environment for QA1 that is going to run in US West, and then QA5 is going to run in the Japan data center for AWS. And when you deploy to the environment. And the nice thing is we take all of the metadata, and this is the information, the key value pairs can be tied to the environment, and that would be passed into the Terraform as the overrides file. So what ends up happening is your Terraform, your base Terraform file is reusable across every single region. And you just pass in the different, depending on where you're going, you pass in the additional overrides that you need as part of that process. So just to give you that heads up, what we can help you out with that on that front.
Cool. Sounds easy.
15 minutes, we'll have you up and running.
Consultants always make it sound easy.
Yeah.
So, but on that front, you know, the two things that we really need to look at are going to be tracking the relationship and doing deployments. Like I said, what we just talked about was the doing deployment part, but you still need to track the relationships of what you're going to deploy as part of that process. So I'll go ahead and put a Google Doc out there and let everybody know when it's ready to look at. I'm going to first start with the tracking relationships at this level, because this is actually kind of overlapping with it's the SIG interoperability. What is the sub meta working group? That's a CDF. That's a CDF one, right, Tracy?
It is, yeah. In fact, they have their call coming up.
Yeah, they're coming up right after this one. So that information I'll get out to you. And then this type of relationships, I was talking to we were talking to a data scientist last week, and I did some, he was big into using graphs in ML as part of the managing relationships and graph databases. And I started looking at what is out there and how it could fit into what we're doing. It's a great idea. I think what we need to do for component sets, it may be too much of a heavy lift for us to change our whole database schema, our whole database implementation from a Postgres over to like a NeoJ or a Janus or something like that. But I think we can still do the relationships that we want in the Postgres database. We're not talking about trillions of nodes like they deal with in the graph databases. I figured if we have 5,000 microservices and the number of relationships between the 5,000, if you have like 10 environments or that you're going to, that's only 50,000 in relationships you got to manage instead of the trillions. Even if we went to 100 environments that we're managing the relationships of that to, we're only at 500,000 relationships, which is still pretty small for a relational database. It's not like we're at a billion rows or something like that we need to manage.
However, I think it might be good at least to take a look at rebuilding the backend database. We should at least research it and determine if it's worth it.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And I don't know how that, if we think about what it might look like, because the Tara Hernandez is pretty amped about the idea of a marketplace. And if we go that route, and if we are become a centralized marketplace, as this conversation is supposed to be around, would that help or would that be a problem? And do we need that kind of a back end to really display a lot bigger data? So it may be worth it in the long run if we start looking at it now before we have a lot of people on. Just a thought.
Oh, I'd love to do it. Just got to figure out how.
You know, I'm very old school. I really like to have the, you know, database with all the data in it so that I can take snapshots, and there's lots of tools around Postgres for being able to manage that sort of thing. And Amazon gives you RDS, and so that really makes it easy to build large stuff and not have to worry about managing it. I would really hope that there's some sort of sidecar thing that would allow us to give like a GraphQL API on top of our Postgres data rather than rewrite the database to be able to give people access to information in that format.
Hey, well, let's make that our let's make that a goal for our next meeting in the next 2 weeks. Let's all go look to see if we can find something of that sort. That would be great, right?
So just to a little clarification. So GraphQL is not a graph database. They're two totally separate things. So a GraphQL is a replacement for a RESTful API call. And the ID, GitHub uses GraphQL a lot on their transactions. But the idea is I submit one request, and then that request is broken out into sub requests through GraphQL on the back end. The GraphQL sub requests can be hitting a relational database. That's where it actually started. So, and there is I was reading that there is a new trend to merge GraphQL with graph databases out there. It's just another way to transport the data from the back end to the front end, from your back end over to the browser side, the GraphQL.
I mean, does providing a GraphQL interface on our data satisfy the data scientist need in that regard, or do we really get something from having this stored in a graph database? I'm not clear.
I'm not clear either. That's
okay.
Exactly.
So so we could take our existing implementation, which is based on REST, a RESTful API set, and there's a database layer that takes the request, the RESTful API request, says, oh, you want to go get a user. It creates the SQL statement to go grab the user, hits the database, the Postgres comes back, puts that into a JSON string, and returns that transaction back to the requester. On the GraphQL side, if we're going to do that, you'd have a GraphQL transaction come in. We go ahead and do the same Postgres SQL query to query the database, get the user, and you return the JSON back to the GraphQL, back to the requester. Now, on a graph database, what ends up happening is it can either be a GraphQL or a RESTful API call. It doesn't really matter. Just when we get into the middle layer, what we do is when we go to make our connection to the database, we're making instead of SQL calls, we're making graph syntax call. One is called like Gremlin, like GQL is another interface. There's a couple other language sets. They haven't really standardized on them yet, but basically there's a query that happens, and it goes and gets the data from the graph database and returns it. So what ends up happening is we can replace the Postgres database with a graph database, and the middle layer would still return the same information back to the requester. So you can actually do this whole swap and replace without changing the front end code at all at that level. All the back end stuff would be replaced. Now, the advantage of the graph database is it's designed to be around relationships and managing relationships. So some of the stats I've read is if you have a table of 100 million rows, that it's sub-second for you to do a query and get your relationships out of 100 million rows.
Whoa.
Just because of the way that the data is stored. Now, most of the implementations I've seen the graph databases sit on top of another database or some sort of persistence data store, depending which cloud provider you're at and which ones that like some of the implementations use Google's big data. Is it big data or big table? Something like whatever the Google big data one is, as a backend data store. So that's how they persist it through that at that level. It's the only thing that's going to really, the advantage of the graph database is the speed to manage the relationships and the size. You know, I think the amount of storage that was going to take up is going to be less, but we store so little information. We store a lot of little information instead of big sets of data. I think our Postgres database right now is only like 500 megabytes for our SAS, which isn't that big. I mean, we're not even over a gig for our data for at that level. So that's kind of what's happening. Does that help kind of give you the distinction?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like if we wanted to scale to much larger than we're expecting to scale, that it would help us do that.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's a way to do like a hybrid where we would actually be using both at the same time and kind of go that route as well. So where we needed the heavy relational, the relationships between two objects that we could maybe, maybe when the RESTful API call comes in, it hits the middle layer, that it gets saved to the Postgres database and also over to the graph database as well. And then if you need to do some fast queries or something like that around the relationships, that transaction would be looking directly at the graph database and not the relational, the Postgres one. So let me see if I.
So I think what we have to decide which one we want to take on first. I think we should just focus right now on the component sets.
Yeah, and for us to implement component sets in the Postgres database is not going to be a lot of database changes, and we'll add a couple columns and maybe one table. So it's not like it's going to throw us totally out of whack dealing with component sets.
What is
And did
really
you guys-
different about component sets than what we're currently doing?
So right now, this came up the other day.
I know you've explained this a few times, but maybe I'm just thinking.
It took me for a bit to understand. So basically what where we first heard this was from Michael Galloway at Netflix, and they have created microservices that should not be loosely coupled.
So in
They
this
can't
case,
be loosely coupled. So now they have to create a set of microservices that get deployed together, even though they have nothing to do with an actual application that somebody's like if you're a bank, a teller application. It's a set of microservices that they've created that they have to be released all at the same time. They could have put them in the same container, but they didn't. And apparently Intuit has had the same issue.
Cool.
So in this example, each one of these is a component version that's being consumed by the application version that's in the middle. A component set would be where we would tie like shipping and checkout service together. And those two versions would be tied to a component set. And then you'd have a version of the component set that would be associated to the application version. So instead of having the shipping service directly related to the application and the checkout service directly related to the application, you'd have the set related to the application. Then you could drill into the set to see what the versions are inside of that.
So like a collection, basically.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Kind of like grouping those, you know, grouping them together in a way.
exactly. It's a grouping model.
It's a release train for microservices that can't be released independently.
Yeah. So
Makes sense.
It's an oops. Actually, it's an oops.
and the weird part is when you talk to like Netflix and who is it, Argo CD, each microservice is considered an application. This is where it gets really confusing. So they look at, and this is because they came out of the monolithic world, and dealing with like VMs and things like that, especially with Netflix, that a microservice is an application, and then you have application sets, which in our world is just the application version. And then, you know, so there's this terminology thing that we're going to have to battle a little bit. I think the way we describe it is a little bit easier to understand, breaking out a component versus an application instead of having an application set of an application set, which is included in another application set. You know, and at the end of the day, what do you have? You know, an application. Well, that's the microservice. You know, so I think those companies have been reusing the same terminology too much. The other way I've heard about it would be these would be applications. We'd have an application set, and then you'd have a product that you're that
Right.
somebody's dealing
Can
with.
I try use food as an analogy?
Yep.
So like you have a whole bunch of M&Ms, that would be all your microservices, right?
Yep.
And then the packet of the M&Ms and in would be the collection.
Correct.
For that application, right?
Right. Well,
Okay.
that would be, that package of M&Ms would be at this level. That's what we have today.
Yeah.
So today we have a bunch of M&Ms that are packaged together into your package of that you get to open and stuff like that. That's the description today that we have. But if in the component set world, you would have, let's say for Christmas, you had all the green M&Ms in a sub package, and then you had a bunch of other M&Ms, and you opened up your big package, you'd find a bunch of M&Ms plus a package containing only green ones.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now you go up one more level and you roll it up to the release, which we don't model in
Actually, like a
Ortelius.
box.
That would either be a box or, you know, a big bag.
Yeah,
like for a big bag you get from the store that has a bunch of smaller bags inside of it.
Okay, cool. No, that makes sense. No, I'm very visual, so like I've got like this left brain because I'm left-handed, so I like to see it like there's a picture. I'm just trying to understand.
It helps.
And that's where I'm going to break out the grammar, so it's easier to understand the relationships and at that level.
So I've got a couple questions. So one is, are component sets be inside of component sets?
Oh God, let's hope not.
I don't think so. I think initially we would not do that.
This gets back to the question I had before, which I didn't ask yet, which was, you know, it sounds like a component set is something that wishes it were an application, but isn't willing to call itself an application because of whatever organization or cultural reasons. And so,
yep.
What if we just said, okay, we already have this concept of an application, and we're going to let there be applications inside of applications inside of applications, and then the next time somebody comes along and says, oh shit, we need another level of abstraction, we don't have to go back and redo the database again to be able to accommodate this.
Yeah, I've thought about that, and that's one we're gonna have to kick around and look at if we want to do it that way.
And we could potentially do it based on, and I want to be sure to give Owen some time to talk about the website.
Oh,
But
I didn't know he was on.
Yeah, but we could potentially think about it in terms of domains. We could create a domain set. So anything that you want to package together could be everything in a particular domain. And we have that level. So
Right.
Do we let domains go inside of domains at this point?
yes.
Yeah, domains are hierarchical.
So you could have a
Okay.
subdomain that you could package, or you could have you could package the whole domain.
It's like Active Directory.
Yeah.
And speaking of Owen, Owen asked a question in chat earlier. I don't know if we want to get back to that or not.
Oh, I missed it. Yeah, let's go ahead and jump over to Owen.
He asked earlier about the metadata stuff and whether we should duplicate storing that inside of Ortelius or whether we should just, connect to other places that actually have that information available.
We need to connect. We have to store the pointer to where the other information is. So for a deeper dive, for example, if we have a component that's based on a Docker container, we have a pointer to the Docker registry and the SHA, as well as the tag. Now we don't store the layers. We don't store any information about the layers in the container, and we don't store anything about the what's in the container, such as, let's say, if it's a Node.js, what Node.js packages are installed. That's a whole nother conversation of relationships that we need to bring in way down the road after we figure out component sets.
Well, I say we take a look. Steve, why don't you take a look to see if we could do it by a domain?
Okay.
Because that would solve the problem, because you could then create any domain and subdomain and package it in any way you wanted. It's got the tag on it, so we should be able to say, yeah, this is a domain set.
Yeah. The only thing I on that would be if you have 10, let's say you have a security domain and that you have 10 microservices in the security domain, and you want to create two sets that have overlapping components. How do you handle that? Because a component can only live in one domain at a time. So if you have 5 in the middle, and then so you have one component set supposed to contain A, B, and C, and the other component is supposed to contain B, C, and D. How do you represent that at the domain level?
I mean, I think that's a violation of the concept of component sets. I think the component sets within a domain should all be distinct sets. I can't see why you would.
Well, you could, yeah, I guess you're saying they would have to, if you were to package a domain, are we going to give them the ability to restrict in that package one of the subdomains? Is what you're saying?
Well, you just have to handle the case where a component has to be in multiple sets.
Right. So that would be at a higher domain, right? Because the lower domain sees everything in the higher domain.
Right, but how high up do you go?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, you'd have to be able to restrict it. So we're going too deep on this. Let's let before we need to talk about the website.
Yep.
Hey, Owen, you want to chat for a minute? He's still there. He's just on mute.
I was wondering
Owen?
if his audio was working since we hadn't heard from him and he was putting so much stuff in the chat.
I know. So I was wondering too.
Yeah.
Or he's just someplace he can't.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah.
Yay, there you
Yeah,
are.
sorry, on a equivalent of a construction site right now. So a mobile connection, I've just had to turn off the video. So otherwise it was all going to go horribly wrong.
No problem.
Yeah, so very quickly on the website, I haven't got a massive update since the last time we spoke. The fever I had ended up running an extra week or so. And then I had the farm I had to deal with. But the good news from my side is the production launch of the company I'm currently working with has been delayed down to March. So I have next few days after today and weekend and next week off. So I will have an update in the next couple of days, which I'll share on Discord. Steven's now added me onto the GitHub team, so I can comment back on that issue and actually share it directly through there. It is in a shareable state, so once I've got back home from the farm, which will hopefully be in the next couple of days, I'll be at my machine and I can link that through. But I'm currently in the arse end of nowhere, unfortunately, with very limited net access. So I will post on the GitHub issue once I'm back with the laptop in front of me. So sorry about delays on this, just lots of life stuff kind of coincided
No
at the same
worries.
time.
No worries.
Really, it's nothing that's life-threatening at all.
And just let us know if you need any help on any of this. We're here to help out.
Yeah, absolutely, will do. As I said, it's a bit unfortunate because it is there. I just need to actually get back now in front of something to share the links and share the data. So yeah, once it's been shared, that's the point when we can then begin iterating on it quite a bit. But at the very least, if I don't get back at the end of the week as I'm expecting, I can still share the links to the public-facing versions of it, which I've got on my domain, and then I can share the pipeline in over the weekend once I'm definitely back.
Yeah, and let me know when we get closer, or if you need a new repository created under Ortelius.
Yep, no problem. We can probably do it off the back of the repository, which was already there, which was the initial template of the Hugo one, which is what I forked from. But yeah, I'll catch up on everything this weekend and see where I'm at and reach out to folk.
Sounds good.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you so much.
And then I think again, I think we have to go back. It sounds like we really should just focus on getting the components sorted out. And I really think that to really answer like Christopher's question, we need to get somebody from Netflix and somebody from Intuit on the call. And I will make it a goal to get that done. It might not happen until January, but I think that is really what we need to hear it from both those, from the Spinnaker and the Argo side, what they're trying to solve. So I will, I've already reached out and I will make that happen.
Yeah, if we have to understand the use case better.
Yeah. And I will do that.
All right, perfect.
I just have to remember who it was that sent me back a message saying that they could do it. Somebody by the name of Karthik from, no. Somebody by the name of Jesse Suin from Intuit. And somebody from Maya Data. So I will get back to these folks.
Perfect. Okay, anything else that I'm missing? Alrighty.
Have a good one.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
Hey guys.
Bye.